Hello, Blake Rudis here with Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com, and what you're looking at right now is not a painting. It looks like a painting. It's not a painting. What it is it's a rendition of this image that has been run through Topaz Labs impression. Now, the preset that was used here was something called chiaroscuro, which is an old painting technique that is about light falling from a particular direction, and it creates this very high contrast between light and dark. Now, Topaz Impression is actually a paint filter type plugin and also has a standalone interface also, but it works right here seamlessly in Photoshop, so you see I can be using it on separate layers all by themselves. So before we dive into what Topaz Impression is and how it works, I want to tell you that I used to be a painter. Years ago, I was a painter. About 4 years ago, I stopped painting. Maybe even longer than that. 4 or 5 years ago, I stopped painting. And I started getting more into photography. But I painted for years. I'm talking probably since I was about 6 or 7 years old. I picked up paintbrushes and I was painting with acrylic paints at a very young age, moving into oils, pastels, charcoals, going to school for fine art. And that's where we are here. So looking at Topaz Impression, my first reaction to it was, great, another filter program that allows us to make a painting from a photograph. And the reason why I said that was because most filters or plugins that create paintings from a photo don't do it very well. They do it in a way that you can really predict where certain areas are going to fall, how certain effects are going to take place, and you can run this two different images, the same filter, and they both kind of have the same, different architecture amongst what's happening from that filter. It's a lot different with Topaz Impression. Topaz Impression actually looks and feels a lot like a painting, more so than I would think from a normal filter program. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that layer. Before we get into Topaz Impression, the first thing we need to do is go to Image, Mode, make sure that we have RGB color selected and either 8 bits or 16 bits because that's all it's going to work on. Alright, so I'm just going to press Command or Control J to duplicate that layer. I'm going to go to Filter, go to Topaz Labs, and go to Impression. It's a very simple interface. It's very easy to use. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger here. On the right hand side, you're going to see some presets, all different types of presets, and these presets have been made from different styles in art history. So we're talking Impressionism, even some Van Gogh looking stuff, some Da Vinci, all different types of presets. Colored pencil here makes it look exactly like a colored pencil drawing. Like I said, I'm not sure what kind of magic they have at Topaz Labs, but I like it, whatever it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in and let's look at something more painterly. So let's look at impressionistic. You see how this actually looks like it has brush strokes in it, actual brush strokes. And the reason why is because these brush strokes have been scanned in from actual paintings, remasked out, and then added into the algorithm. So what you're getting are actual paint strokes, not some computer rendition of a paint stroke. So let's look at the inner workings of this impressionistic style here. So when you first click on, if we need to go back to our presets, we can click that little arrow up there, but let's just click on that impressionistic one. And if you click on it, double click it, you click on the little settings in the middle, it'll take you to what's happening in the background. So you can see here, let's just drop it from the very top. You've got your brush, and you have different types of brushes that you can use. And you can change these on the fly. That's what I absolutely love about this program. Because in filter programs in the past, if you chose this brush type and you went through that whole filter process, guess what? You were kind of stuck with it. But not with Topaz Impression, because at any point, at any time, you can go back up and say, well, maybe I want to use the line style instead, or make it look like a chalk or rather than a paint. That's what you can do there. It's great. You have all these different brush types up here. So let's go back to that original one that we were in. And let's look at all these individual sliders here. So what we have are, the first one is going to be our brush size. And that's pretty self-explanatory. It's the size of the brush on the canvas. The larger I make that brush, you can see the more it blends all of the detail within the image. But what I want you to look at here, look at the finite details. Look at these finite lines on that carpet. They have remained the same. Almost as if the painter went in with its palette knife and carved in those lines on the painting. So that's really important to note here, is that very small details like that will stay relatively protected, but still look as if they belong within the painting. It's absolutely incredible, and something that you don't see in most paint filter types of programs or plugins. And the reason why is because they kind of blend and just kind of mush everything together into the algorithm that they're in. But this one works absolutely different. I'm not going to ask Topaz what their algorithm is. That's their secret. But I like their secret because it does some really amazing stuff here. So if we move this down, you can see that our brush strokes are really, really small, and it's not that good. But let's say we liked something like this, but you see there's all these little pockets and pits here. You can actually scroll down here to where it says background and change the background from white to maybe a certain color that's within this image. So we can go to maybe one of those lighter yellows or lighter orangish looking colors, maybe right here, and press OK, and that will fill in all those areas in the background. So that's the background area. We'll get back to that later. So if I scroll back up to the top, we have the brush size here. The further to the left, the smaller the brush gets. The further to the right, the larger the brush gets. But obviously you're going to have some of your details being blended in. But look at how this is operating. And look at the size of the area that's being created. And look at how the plugin looks at highlight, midtone, and shadow and kind of uses the appropriate brush to go along with it. I don't know about you, but I find this pretty amazing compared to what I've seen in the past. So I'm going to go with the brush size about that. Now, paint volume. The paint volume is the thickness of the application. So if you're like a Van Gogh, you've got those really thick applications of paint, so thick of applications of paint that when they are looked at in certain light, they actually pick up highlights and shadow. That is exactly what's happening here. These paint strokes are getting a little bit of highlight and shadow on the individual paint strokes. So if you increase that paint volume, it's a really thick paintbrush, like you just gob some paint on there and started going to town on your canvas. So, paint opacity. Now the paint opacity determines the transparency of the paint on the image. So the further to the left you get, it's less and less opaque as far as the paint is concerned. You can start to see some of that, more of the stuff from the background come through there, and it's not quite as thick as it was with that paint volume application there. So then the stroke width is just how wide those brush strokes are, just how thick those brush strokes are themselves. So you can see the thicker it gets, the bigger the brush stroke gets essentially, and the smaller it gets, we start to get into that chalk, or I guess that pencil style look, and we move our way toward the chalk style. So you can see there's presets that have already been determined for you, but if you know how these individual tools work, you're almost making your own paint strokes within them. So if we choose one of those and maybe go to this one, obviously we get a very small thin paint stroke, but let's go back to that original one that we had because I like that one. And move our stroke up a little bit, our stroke width up a little bit. Now the stroke length, just like the name implies, the bigger you get with that on the slider, the longer those strokes get. You see how that works there? I mean, just doing it really slow, it almost looks as if a painter is painting those into the image. It's very intuitive. It's very different than what I'm used to seeing in a paint application program. This really feels like I'm a painter on canvas. And I'm not going to take anything away from anyone who paints because I know a lot of painters, but this is probably as close as it gets in the digital world as far as quick and efficient paint. There's a lot of people that do some great digital paintings too, so I'm not going to take that away from them either. But what this does is it could really cut down some time on a regular photograph to make it look more painterly. So then the spill, this determines how clear the edge will be of a stroke when it is applied. So that's like the edges of the individual edges that you see in an image. So if we look down here in those little lines that we saw before, you can see they're kind of filling in and spilling over into those little crevices that we had before. So let's change it to stroke width a little bit, and then we'll go into that spill so you can see how that works. So if you don't like maybe how those edges are so crisp, you can just increase that spill so they look a little bit more on the painterly side rather than a pattern that you would see in the real world. Then we have the smudge tool here. And the smudge, this blurs those edges and kind of blurs them together to get that soft, dreamy looking effect. So there we get some more of that Van Gogh style looking effect too, if we were to bring that up just a little bit. Now we've got almost a genuine Van Gogh look there. And then coverage. Coverage is one of those things that as you move it down, it's going to kind of create a vignette around the sides of the image. As far as a painting is concerned, I don't know if I'd necessarily do that for something like the paint strokes that we have applied here, but if you're doing more of a watercolor effect, this is a perfect tool to use for that. And then the transition, you can decide how far that transition comes in on the image as it comes in. So when you're using something like a watercolor effect, that's perfect. Give you that kind of dreamy looking vignette around your painting. So then we have the colors here. And the colors, this is kind of like your hue saturation adjustment layer. You basically get the overall hue of the entire image, but then you get each individual color. When you click on a color, it shows you where red is and what red is on this image. So if we were to increase the hue, you can see that just in all those areas of red, we can change the hue of the color red, maybe even the saturation of the color red, and make those areas a little bit deeper. So now we did all the brush strokes and all the paint strokes. Now we get to go into all those little finite details of the colors that are happening here and really accentuate those colors, just like a painter would do if they wanted something to be a little bit more saturated, a little bit less saturated. The lightness or the darkness of the color red, I kind of like it on that darker side here. So we move up the saturation a little bit. Actually, let's leave the saturation about right there. And the hue, I kind of like it a little bit more of that red hue rather than the orange hue that we had before, because a lot of the stuff in this image is very orange and yellow. So I'm going to differentiate that by using red. So if we look at orange, like I said, there's a lot of orange in this image. We can change that. We can start to make this a different looking color. So if we get, move that hue down a little bit, then we change the saturation. We can make the whole room a little bit more red. I'm not going to do that though, because I like that orange feeling that I had here, that orange glow that is in this room. So I'm just going to leave that alone. I can maybe bring up the saturation to get a little bit more glow in there, because this is a painting now. And painting and photography are a little bit different. In photography, you really want to be careful of your saturation. But in painting, it's all right to have a little bit of saturation in your images. So if I bring that up just a little bit, we'll just leave it right about there. And then we can change the lightness or the darkness of that color orange. Now there's a lot of orange in this image, so if we bring it up too high, it's going to move really quick. What I want to show you here is that right here inside this painting here, that is the original shows that we have a light here and even like a ceiling fan here. Look at how that ceiling fan kind of just pushes out a little bit through that mirror, just like it would in haphazard paint stroke. It also still looks like and resembles a ceiling fan. We can still see that. That just, to me, it really blows me away. So as we move our way down here, let's look at another color. See if we have any green in here. Do we have any green? A little bit there. I like that. Let's bump up the green a little bit on that pot there. Not a whole lot anywhere else. Make that a little bit darker too. A little bit darker green to match the darkness of the red that's in the image. Again, I'm becoming a painter here. This is great. I'm really going back to my roots here with this whole painting thing, and I really love what this program has allowed me to do now, because it's rekindled a certain spark for me. With that being said, if I were to print this on canvas, we now have a whole new element to photography being printed on canvas that could look really great. So if we move our way down, we have some more lighting adjustments here too. We can increase the overall brightness of the paint on the image. If we bring that down, we can see some detail in the windows, but I don't like it when it's down, so I'm going to bring that up and kind of really push that glow of the light coming through those windows. We can increase or decrease the contrast. Now this is like the beginning image that you saw with that chiaroscuro, that really nice contrast between the light and dark. And I like how that works here too. So I'll do that. I'll keep that the same. And you can also add a vignette if we wanted to add a vignette. So up here we have the coverage that kind of comes in the shape of a vignette, but then we also have a vignette that allows us to apply a vignette to the image as well. Again, maybe not something so much that I would put on a painting, because it's kind of hard to add that vignette to a painting unless you do maybe some wash in the end. But then let's go to the vignette transition. We don't have a vignette right now, so we're not going to worry about that. If we did, we could. And then you have the light direction. You can actually choose which direction the lighting is going to be coming in from. So if we choose something like right here, because that's about the middle of the image, that's probably a good place to put that light direction coming in from. So we'll do that. Then we have texture here. So you can actually add different types of texture to the image. So we can actually put a little canvas underneath it. So if we increase the texture of the canvas, it's kind of hard to see now. If I was to post this online and wanted to make it look like a painting, if I was going to post it digitally, I would actually probably do something like one of these canvas style textures. If I was to print it on canvas, I would just let the canvas actually come through. But you have all these different textures here, all these different textures that allow different types of medium. So the medium is placed on a different type of texture. And when I was in college, one of the things that I used to do because it was cheap was I would stretch a canvas stretcher with bed sheets and then paint on bed sheets, because it was a whole lot cheaper to buy a giant bed sheet than it was to buy a roll of canvas. So I'd buy a bed sheet, I'd stretch it on the canvas, and then I'd paint on that bed sheet. And it's no different here. You can choose all different types of textures. You've got some cracked textures. One of the ones that I like the best here, though, is that canvas texture. So I'll put it back on that canvas texture. So here, if we zoom back out, you can see we've got this nice little canvas texture that if we posted this online, it would almost appear like I painted this. I could probably fool someone and say, hey, I just got done with a new painting. I just picked up my paintbrushes for the first time. I wouldn't do that, though. I would tell them that I got it from Topaz Impression. But you can also choose the size of that texture to see how large that texture is coming through underneath the paint. So if I drop the strength, I'm not going to put a texture on this. I'll just drop that. See how back here on these corners, during the process of adjusting all of the tools here, the brush tools here, I am seeing some white come through back here. So I'll click on that background again and then just kind of change that to an existing color to those edges there and see how that looks. And there, it filled it in. So if you're ever using those tools, those brush tools, and you start to see some white kind of flecking through, but you really like what it is that you've got, just go down there to that background, click on the background, and add a background that looks similar to the rest of the photo. Now, like I said before, I'm not really too fond of just how well this detail is coming through. I want to make it look a little bit more like the palette knife came through, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of smudge that up a little bit. There we go. So it didn't look so like a real pattern that we see there. Now, like I said before, we had this brush selected when we first did all of these adjustments, but now I'm not stuck with that brush. Maybe I want to change my brush. We want a different style of brush on this image. Now that I've got all that set up, all I have to do is click on any one of these brushes and I can see the exact rendition of it with all of these presets or tool presets that I've selected here. And that's something that's a lot different, because a lot of times you'll pick a certain filter and you're stuck with that filter. Here you actually have brushes that decide how the rest of the filter is going to look. And you can change those on the fly however you see fit, whenever you see fit. So I'm going to change that right back to where it was as that brush, that nice brush stroke that we had there. And if I ever want to change the size, I can do that too. What I would do is actually work from that top to bottom though. So just like we started here, we started with brush size, we worked our way down, and we were able to come up with a nice looking painting here. So if I press OK, what you can actually see here is that it's now on its own layer. So I can actually change the blending options of this now if I wanted to, and kind of get those paint strokes on my actual image now. So it doesn't look so painterly that it's like this. We can actually even drop the opacity of it maybe a little bit, make the rest of the background come through a little bit more. That's a nice look there too. So as a standalone plugin, you'd have the ability to go into the actual plugin itself, and at the bottom of the plugin, if we go back to let's just go back to Topaz Impression, we'll just duplicate the background filter, Topaz Labs Impression. You actually have those blending options down here as well. So you can change the blending options on the preset that you're working with at that time. So normal, multiply, hard light, overlay. You don't have quite the amount that you have in Photoshop, but you still have quite a lot available to you. So if you do want to change those blending options, you're able to do that. Here we can actually drop the opacity a little bit, change the blending options, and we can even put a mask on it now. So I could mask out maybe these chairs to make these chairs look realistic and the rest of it look like it was painted. So there's a lot of possibilities with this, instead of just being just go to town and paint it. And what you can do with compositions, what you can, or composites, I should say, where you're adding one image on top of another image. You can use a lot of what's available to you right now in this tool, this new tool that's in our toolbox here, this Topaz impression. So again, my name is Blake Rudis with Everyday HDR and HDR Insider, and this was a fresh look at Topaz Labs impression, and my impression of it is that it's awesome. I'm sure you can tell that by my excitement, but that comes from the fact that I used to be a painter, and I love what I see here because it creates almost like a random brush stroke rather than the predictable, typical brush stroke that I would see from a normal filter plugin or program. So I really do enjoy it. I really do like it. I know for a fact that I'm going to be using this quite often in my more artistic pieces. Maybe not in all of my photography, but in my artistic pieces where I want to really accentuate the image, especially an image like this, perfect for Topaz impression. So if you like this, please share, comment, subscribe, and take a look at topazlabs.com. Again, that's topazlabs.com, and look around for impression because it is great. I'll go ahead and put a link below to the store.